Welcome back to the Knife Life, guys. Today we're talking with Allen Elishewitz, very famous knife maker of excellent work and very precise machine work. Really cool to be sitting down here talking with him today, so thank you for joining me
Thanks
today.
for having me on.
So, for the people who don't know you, can you give us a little bit of your background about how you got into knife making and what you do?
So what got me into knife making was martial arts. And I started when I was 10 and kept on training different kind of like Okinawan Karate-Do and Kung Fu. And when I was about 17, we moved to Thailand because my dad's job took us there. And over there, I started designing knives. And I had the local knife makers in Ayutthaya, which is a town on the other side of the river of Bangkok, because that was the sword capital. Okay, that's where all the knives were made, make me my designs. And so after graduating high school in Thailand, came back to the States, and I still had that urge for designing knives. And it got pretty expensive on a college budget, you know, so I started learning how to make my own knives. And so I started making knives, and at first I was a fixed blade maker, okay, and then Greg Walker, he's the editor of Fighting Knife magazine, and he said, you know what, you should start looking into folders. Okay, this was early 90s, probably 90, okay, and so I took his advice, I started work on folders, and then around probably about 93 is when you started seeing the tactical folders start ramping up. Okay, so I was, I guess, lucky to be part of the 5 knife makers that really inspired the whole tactical folder movement. In no order, it's Bob Duzuler, Kit Carson, Ernie Emerson, myself, and Pat Crawford. We were really the ones that were actually pushing it. There were other makers, but we were the ones that were really in the magazines pushing it. And from there, just my knives kept on evolving over the years. I've always been in tactical knives. You know, it looks artsy at times because I've taken the tactical and refined it to a higher level, but it's always been tactical. Never got into fantasy, never got into hunting, never got into the art knife, but it's always just been pure tactical.
So there may be some art in the knife,
yes,
but it is still 100% function-based.
Yeah, yes. And I've always wanted to push myself refining the art of knife making. And I mean, yeah, I could have just taken the easy road and just made the exact same thing I did like in 95. The exact same technique, the exact same look, and never grow from there. You know, but I wanted to grow the art, and you know, and you can look throughout history, you'll see like a flintlock rifle, which is just very crude, or then you can see one that's absolutely gorgeous with carvings and pop-up peep sights that were not even common in that time period. You know, that particular craftsman brought that flintlock to a very high level. And that's what I would like to do with tactical knives, fighting knives, self-defense knives, raise it to a much higher refined level, you know.
Excellent. So in your experience working with tactical knives, what really defines a tactical knife for you? When you're going and you're making a knife or you're looking for a new knife, what do you want in that knife?
The way I go about designing a new model is I'll look at what do I want that knife to do. Okay, do I want it to be very specific Pakal ice pick grip, or do I want it to be sock hammer grip? Do I want it to be a military knife, or do I want it to be self-defense? Do I want it to be concealed, or do I want it to be basically open carry? You know, and then that starts dictating size, features of the knife, weight, blade design, handle designs. You know, and then from there I start refining it. Do I want this to be more of a stabbing or thrusting instrument, or do I want it to be more of a slashing instrument? You know, and then from there the design starts morphing, and then I start revising my design over and over and over again until I complete what I'm focusing on, and then from there I go ahead and make the knife.
So Starting out as a fixed blade maker, then you made your transition to folding knives. What did that process kind of look like, and what do you really look for in folding knives nowadays? So when you're making a folding knife, what is really critical to you in that aspect?
The transition from folder to from fixed blade to folder was scary, you know, because now I'm building something that actually folds, that locks, that has to be more precise, that has to fall in and be centered in the handle, versus a fixed blade. It's very simple. It's a bar of steel with a handle. I mean, essentially that's what it is, a bar of steel and a handle. No pivoting points, nothing. You know, it's pretty hard to mess up a fixed blade. So the transition from fixed blade to folder was scary and, let's say, painful, because I was screwing a lot of things up. Remember, back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was no hammer-ins. There were no schools. We had like, what, 2 or 3 magazines? We had maybe like 10 shows. Back then, knife makers held things back. They weren't as open as they are now, okay? Because now we have the internet, we have hammer-ins, we have schools, we have videos, we have everything. So, I mean, there's no excuse for someone not to be able to make a knife, a folding knife. So once I started making folders, my main focus was reliability and dependability. You know, overbuild it, but not overly build it. You know, there's no need to have a 1/4-inch blade or a 1/4-inch stock of material, okay? That's overkill. And so what I look for now in folders is how well is the parts made? You know, is the stop pins bigger than 1/8 of an inch? Right now, bearings are a very popular thing in folders, okay? Are they using small bearings? Or are they using big bearings? You know, big in size of diameter. Because if you're saying, I'm a tactical knife maker, and I use these really tiny bearings that basically from the center of the ball to the center of the ball is maybe like 3/8. How strong is that laterally? That means the integrity of your knife laterally is based on a 3/8 washer. Pretty small. You know, so how thick's their liner? How is it engaged? How is it built? Are they just going with brute force to keep that knife open? Or are they using geometry and proper machining to get everything aligned properly? So that's what I look for in folders now. How well is it built? Are they using brute force to keep it open, or are they using the finesse of geometry to keep it open?
So there are 2 knife makers that I know who are very good and well known for their machining. One of them being you, the other one being Owen Wood. Both of you are very accomplished machinists, and especially what both of you do. Why is the precision of that so important to you, and how do you go about achieving that?
The precision in the folder, the way I look at it, the reason why it's so important is because over time, you're going to have wear in your folders, okay, everywhere. So you're going to have compounded wear. And if you give your locking mechanism a chance to move, it's that you're giving it that much more chance for it to slip off, okay? And so the tighter you make the knife in tolerances and material selections, okay, and proper machining and proper lining up, the less chances of the wear and the less chances you're going to give the lock the ability to want to slip off or fail you, okay? And the way I do it is you have to machine to numbers. And that's an old machinist saying. You have to machine the numbers. When you design it, there's numbers that you give the knife, and you have to machine to it, okay? And I mean, let's be honest. I've made knives that the tolerances were all over the place. And they will work. It will work. I mean, you could have backspacers 10 thousandths off, and the folder will still work, okay? Having it properly, the right thickness is better. And it's also a self-discipline to yourself to keep your work more honest. You know, yeah, I could go, okay, I'll just let that slide. You know, and a lot of guys will just go, oh yeah, it's 10 thousandths off, I'll just let it slide. But for your own self-discipline, you'll go, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and shave off the 10 thousandths and be right on the number.
And just that 10 thousandths, just a little bit of wiggle room here, a little bit of wiggle room there. Just because it's not going to cause an issue now, not going to cause an issue a week, not an issue down a month, it could cause an issue later eventually, especially when you really need it to work. So really focusing on that and making sure that that will not become an issue.
Like what Michael Janis would say, proper structure, all right? You could have your hands like this, but yeah, this will work. This is better. You could have your liners parallel, but you know what? If it's 10 thousandths off, yeah, it'll still work. But having it parallel is better because it's better structure for the whole knife.
So obviously you use a bunch of the standard machines that you encounter in a machine shop, lathes, grinders, mills, that kind of stuff, but you take advantage of a couple more interesting tools in the shop as well. So the Pantograph being one, and
the guilloche.
The guilloche being the other one. Can you talk a little bit about what those machines are and how they fit into your style of knife making?
So the Pantograph is basically pre-CNC, pre-NC, like maybe I would say 30s, 40s. If you go to the machine shop, you'll always find a Pantograph in there. And basically it is a duplicating machine. You have two tables, a cutting table and a pattern table. And what you do is you trace your pattern with a stylus, and the cutter will move with your stylus. Okay, that's old school CNC, and you can go 3D, and that's how they used to make molds for soles for shoes. Okay, and I use this machine instead of a CNC machine because I'm a basically hardcore handmade.
Everything that you do is
manual machine. You know. Because I've marketed myself, I make handmade knives, okay? You're not going to come in my shop and see a CNC machine in there, all right? Because, I mean, the last time I checked the English language, handmade means handmade, you know? So I keep that very, very truthful in what I do is that, and I have nothing against CNC. Matter of fact, I was one of the early pioneers in the industry to outsource CNC in the early 90s. You know, Bob Juzul and myself was one of the early guys to use a lot of CNC. You know, we never owned it, we outsourced it. And so now a lot of makers have CNC, which is great. You know, I just prefer using manual machines. And the other machine that you mentioned, the guilloche machine is a hand cranked, literally a hand cranked machine. Mine is, I have two from the 1920s, and I think the Swiss one was probably about 1910, okay? And they don't make them anymore. I think the last ones were probably like 1940s they were made. What it is, it's a mechanical engraver. Okay. That's the closest way I could describe it. It's a cross between a pantograph and an engraver. And you have rosettes or patterns that the stylus will follow, and you will hand crank and hand cut each individual line, which is engraving, and it's only like maybe 2 thousandths deep. And are you familiar with the Faberge Egg?
I am not.
Okay, so Faberge is he used to be a Russian artist, and he would make these very elaborate eggs with enamel and gold all over it. I mean, they're worth a lot of money. But if you look through the enamel, you'll see all this decorative work on the silver underneath it. That's guilloche. Okay. So he was one of the major pioneers of guilloche. He used guilloche a lot in his artwork, and then he'll cover it with enamel. Very, very cool machine.
So the Pantograph is what you would be using in order to create very intricate inlays or things like that for grips or parts that inlays into the actual blade itself, and then the guilloche is what you would be using in order to make fine, detailed, decorative scroll work, engraving essentially on the surface of your knives.
What I use my Pantograph for is profiling liners and handles. So what I'll do is I will scribe my liners, I'll cut it on a bandsaw, I'll clean it off, drill 2 holes, put it on my Pantograph, buzz around it, and I can have a stack of liners. They're exactly the same. So that's how I control the consistency of one knife to another. So if you come by my table and you look at all model X, they're all exactly the same. Okay, because from there, all I do is I put my handles on and just barely touch the liner with the grinder, and it's perfect. Every single one is exactly the same.
So, just out of curiosity, what tolerances are you achieving? About 1 thou or 1/10 of a thou on that, or
on the Pantograph? On the Pantograph, if I wanted to, I could probably keep consistency of plus or minus 1,000ths on the periphery. On inlays, I could even go closer to that. Inlays are very difficult. They're very time consuming because you want the materials to look like they grew together without a gap, and that's hard to do.
So a lot of the fitting work, all of that kind of stuff, the pantograph, the touch-up work, all the fine detail, the guichet, and that's how you do all of that work on your knives at this current point in time.
Yes.
Excellent. So now that we've gone from the very, very precise aspect of things, are you freehand grinding your blades, or are you using jigs in order to establish the bevels on yours? Or is the answer yes?
Both. Yes.
Okay.
What's really weird, fixed blades, I freehand grind. Folders, I fixture grind. And I think it's because the fixed blades are thicker, and the fixed blades are longer, and allows me to do weird and complicated twists that a folder, you don't need that on the folder. Our folder is usually a very short blade, very straight, and it's a very straightforward grind. But when a fixed blade, you can actually grind, tilt, and roll and get a very different effect, but it's a much wider, longer blade. And there's a lot of time it's a curve, recurves, or whatever. Folders are usually straightforward. And it's harder to grind a folder by hand. It really is harder. So that's why I will use a grinding jig.
I assume, do you make your own jigs?
I've made my own jigs. Now I've teamed up with Hardcore Product, and we have a very cool modular grinding fixture that we're offering.
Awesome. So for those people who would be interested in that, where could they find that?
You can find that at Hardcore Products. They make a lot of very nice tools and grinders for knife makers.
Excellent. We'll be sure to put a link to those guys down in the description below so you can find them easily. So one thing that you do is that you'll actually perform a double temper on your blades, and that's actually something that you're supposed to do with the higher alloy steels, and a lot of people don't do or even do properly. So can you talk through your heat treating and tempering process regarding that a little bit?
So I use an even heat oven, and I will hold at 2 temperatures before I go to the critical temperature. So I'll hold like at 1300, 1600, and I'm beginning to start thinking I'm going to program the computer to hold at 1800, and then at 1900 it holds. 15 minutes later, I'll take it out of the temperature, out of the oven. And I believe it was last year I built a really cool quenching plate. And what it is, it's 12 by about 15 inches, 1 inch thick aluminum. So you get 2 of them. And then I machined a radiator pattern, okay, leaving a 1/4 inch webbing. So I machined 3/4 inch deep with a 1/2 inch end mill. So basically I removed almost 50% of the meat out of that aluminum, okay? I put 2 pipe fittings on either end, and I capped off the back end. And I have a bucket of water with a pump, so now I could pump water through those plates, and now they're becoming cooler plates or chiller plates, okay? Because a lot of guys, what they'll do is they'll get that 1 inch plate of aluminum, throw your blades on there, and put the aluminum on top, and that's called plate quenching, all right? I've taken it 1 step further. I'm pumping water through the plates. So all that heat's being pulled out of the plates, cooled off, so it's constantly being kept at a certain temperature. And so if you do like maybe 3 folder blades, that's it. Your plate's done if you don't have that water pumping through there. I could do 30 folder blades, and it only raises the water like 30 degrees.
Not much at all.
Not much at all. It really isn't. You know, so then your quenching becomes very, very quickly, down to what the temperature you need. So if you air quench, if you just hold the blade up and just air quench it, it'll take a very, very long time for that blade to go from 1950 down to at least about 150, 200 degrees where you could start handling it. Mm-hmm. Okay, with my quench plate, my chiller plate, I think we videotaped it. It was like 3 seconds. It was 3 seconds in there. I waited another like maybe 5 seconds, pulled it up. I was handling it, straightening it out, throwing it into the tempering oven, and yeah, I would temper it about an hour and a half twice, or 2 hours twice at 450 degrees.
So one question regarding the quench then is, are you doing the quench with the profile set and then you establish the bevels afterwards, or are you doing the bevels first and then quenching after that?
I used to pre-grind and then heat treat and grind. Mm-hmm. And back then my theory was, let me try to remove most of the material so I could get most of my money out of my belts, okay, because the material was soft. And then my cross section would be thinner and I could cool it down quicker. That was in theory, okay. Now what I do is I will quench a solid piece of steel and grind afterwards. Because what happens is you're set up to grind, you have to stop everything, heat treat and temper, and then you have to get remotivated to go back and grind. Once I'm grinding, I want to get it over with. And so I've not really found anything where I'm like going, I'm pulling the tempering out of my steel, okay, because of the way I grind. Mm-hmm. I find that it's actually probably easier to grind after heat treating. I have less tendency to warp the blades. That's one thing that you have to watch out for, pre-grinding and heat treating. So if there's any kind of weird curve in my blade, I straighten it out after the coming out of the oven. I'll surface grind it flat, and then I can just grind it, and then everything is just still maintained flat.
And then you were saying that you weren't having too much issue with pulling the temper out of your blade during the grinding process. A lot of people who attempt that run into a lot of issues with that. So just based off of the solution you had with the quench plates, I have a sneaking suspicion you have a clever way of dealing with that.
Grinding and not pulling the tempering out of the steel, it is knowing how to push your belts, mm-hmm. knowing which belts to choose, okay? And I've gone through several different belt manufacturers, and I will have stacks of blades, and I'll run tests, and then I will record it and say, okay, this belt only did X amount of blades. This belt only did X amount of blades, and I will also record which blades, what steel they are, okay? And so right now I'm sticking with Cubitron 2 from 3M is what I have found to be the most long-lasting belt, the one that grinds the coolest. And so what I usually do is if you get a blank blade, scribe the cutting edge, I will take an old belt, put about a 45 to a 30 degree taper on it, right up to the cutting edge. So then you have a very, let's say about 3/8 high, okay? Then I put a brand new belt and I start grinding. So what happens is you bust that corner off, so it's not shearing off your grit off your fresh belt. So it will actually last a lot longer and it will grind a lot cooler. Mm-hmm. And I don't grind at full speed. And I don't really bear down on the belt.
You let the belt do the work.
You let the belt do the work. And that's how you keep the heat out of your steel.
Excellent.
And then you have a piece of then you have a 5-gallon bucket of water just in case it gets a little too hot. You just dump it in there.
So for your handle materials, some of the more exotic materials that you're using, titanium and zirconium are two of the ones that you'll typically end up with, and they're a little bit more interesting in the grand scheme of things in terms of machining. So how do you go about dealing with those?
So with the titanium, I'll use it two different ways. I'll use it as a bolster or an overlay. The bolster material is usually about 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125, and sometimes they'll go up to 0.46 thick. Okay, that gets mounted onto a liner and I'll contour it. So it's contoured. And behind the bolster, the handle material will be butt up against it. I'll use titanium as an overlay, which is you have your liner, then you put another piece of liner material, titanium, over that. So you keep a very thin profile knife. And typically those knives, the titanium gets machined or guillocheed. Okay, and I'll work with zirconium the same way. And zirconium would be a bolster or an overlay.
And so as a machinist, you don't typically make your own Damascus. Who are you obtaining your Damascus from?
So I get my Damascus from two sources, Chad Nichols and Mike Norris.
Okay.
Yeah. To me, those two are probably both of them are the top tier Damascus makers.
If people are interested in obtaining one of your knives or have any questions or anything like that, what is the best way to find your products or get in contact with you?
So if you're on Instagram, you can look me up, Elishewitz_knives. That is ELISHEWITZ_knives. Or you can get on my website, elishewitzknives.com, and email me from there.
Excellent. And we will have that information down in the description below as well, so you can easily find it. Thank you for joining us today.
Appreciate it, man.
It's been
a
pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Lot.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Knife Life today, please go ahead and think about liking and subscribing, and think about hitting that bell down in the bottom right of the corner of the screen. If you have any more comments or questions, go ahead and leave them down in the comments below. I will get back to you as soon as I can. And until next time, stay safe and keep living the knife life.